I didn't plan it as a test. I should probably say that into this little recorder, even if no one ever plays the tape but me. I'm not sitting here at my kitchen table like some scheming judge, plotting how to trick my own children into revealing their true hearts. I'm 78, not a game show host. I was just an old woman in a familiar chair, thinking about what would happen to my savings when I was gone. It started with a scare, not a dramatic one. No sirens, no bright lights, no TV movie collapse on the linoleum floor. Just a dizzy spell in the grocery store on a gray March afternoon. I remember because there was still salt on the sidewalks and everyone's coats looked tired. I reached for a jar of pasta sauce and the aisle tilted sideways. My hand grabbed the cart harder than it needed to. A stranger's worried voice floated in, "Ma'am, are you all right?" I was, mostly. I sat on a crate in the stockroom while a very young manager brought me water and fussed. The doctor at the clinic later said it was my blood pressure and nothing to panic over. But I could hear the part he didn't say out loud, the part you learn to hear when you're my age. You should be thinking ahead. That evening, back home, I sat at this same table with the little blood pressure brochure under my elbow and my bank papers spread out like a lesson plan. Outside, the last of the snow on the lawn looked gray and half melted. Inside, my life was boiled down to a dozen pieces of paper. It isn't a grand story. I was never rich. I taught school for 38 years. My husband Robert, before he died 7 years ago, worked maintenance at the community college. We paid the house off. We never traveled far. We drove the same car until the doors groaned. We put what we could into savings and a modest retirement account, and we told ourselves it would be enough. It's funny how enough changes. When you're working, enough is whatever keeps the lights on and 3 growing children fed. When you retire, enough becomes a cushion, something soft between you and disaster. But then there's another stage no one really talks about. The stage I've slipped into without quite noticing, where you look at that cushion and think, I'm never going to sit on all of this. Not really. Not before my time is up. That thought sat with me longer than the dizziness did. I added and subtracted. Pension, Social Security, a bit from the IRA, a small survivor benefit from Robert's union. Property taxes, insurance, groceries, prescriptions. The plumber who somehow always manages to appear right after a holiday. I worried, then checked the numbers again. Even allowing for repairs, and the surprises old age likes to throw at you, there was still more than I was likely to need. Not millions, let's not pretend, but more than a retired schoolteacher strictly required to stay afloat in this paid-off little house for, say, another 10 or 15 years. I could almost hear Robert's voice in the back of my mind. We didn't work this hard just to clutch it until your very last breath. We, us. Even after 7 years, I still think of the money as ours, though legally it's now mine. We had 3 children together. 3 very different people who grew up in the same 110-year-old house and somehow walked out into 3 different lives. Daniel, the oldest, always half a step ahead, always with a plan. If you gave him a box of crayons when he was 5, he lined them up by color and length before he drew a thing. Lisa, the middle, softer in some ways, sharper in others. The one who'd cry over a hurt bird and then argue her way out of a speeding ticket. And Mark, my youngest, my wild card. The boy who could charm a room and then trip over the same loose rug he'd been warned about 3 times. The one who seemed to have a knack for finding the potholes in life and stepping in them with both feet. For years, I'd taken it for granted that when I died, whatever was left would be split 3 ways. Equal slices of pie. That's what fair looks like, I used to tell myself. Equal parts. But that evening in March, I thought about how often I'd heard each of their voices recently, and how often I hadn't. The idea didn't arrive fully formed. It crept up, the way the light in this kitchen slowly changes from afternoon to evening. What if, instead of waiting for some lawyer to read numbers off a piece of paper after I'm gone, I take a little bit of that cushion now, and give it while I'm still here to see it do some good? Not all of it, my heart isn't that reckless, but some. The number 10,000 settled into my mind almost on its own. Big enough to matter, small enough not to put me in danger. 10,000 each, 30,000 in total. 30,000 is a great deal when you're standing in a grocery store, hoping you don't faint in front of the canned goods. But against the balance in my accounts, a little over 200,000 between savings and investments, it was a dent, not a disaster. I sat with that number for a long time. I imagined what each of them might do with it. Lisa, almost certainly something practical. Pay down the credit cards that seem to breed like rabbits whenever a car breaks down or a child needs new cleats. Maybe braces for one of her boys, Ethan or Josh. She and her husband have never pretended things weren't tight. Daniel, I could see him absorbing it into a spreadsheet, running scenarios, smoothing it into his already ordered financial life. He has a good job in IT, a nice house in the suburbs, college funds started for his two, Maddie and Connor. It would be a helpful boost, not a lifeline. Mark, well, with Mark it was harder to picture, because so much of his life has been hidden between the lines of our conversations. Little comments about the room I'm renting now, or the guys I'm staying with. Always just vague enough to keep me from asking the questions I'm afraid to hear the answers to. Sometimes, when I hang up, I imagine him in a small, dim room with most of his things still in boxes, sleeping on whatever he can afford. But I told myself, and I meant it, that this wasn't about controlling what they did. This wouldn't be a reward for good behavior or a punishment for bad. If I did it, it would be a gift with clean hands. No conditions, no lectures paper clipped to the checks. The next Wednesday, a cold wind still sneaking around the corners of town, I went to the bank. The young woman at the desk had a silver ring through her nose and a kind, steady smile. She didn't flinch when I told her the total. She just nodded, tapped at her keyboard, and walked me through the options. We settled on 3 separate cashier's checks, each for 10,000, each made out to one of my children. Holding them felt strange. Years of work, flattened into 3 thin slips that could disappear into an envelope with 2 stamps. That afternoon, the late winter light slanting across the table, I set 3 blank cards in front of me. Not for a holiday, just simple cards with watercolor flowers and plenty of white space inside. It mattered to me that they be in my own handwriting. Texts are here and gone, emails get buried. Ink lingers. I wrote Daniel's first. "Dear Daniel," I began, as if he were still the boy bringing home perfect report cards for me to sign, instead of a 53-year-old man taller than any doorway in this house. I told him the truth. About the dizzy spell. About the doctor's warning not to panic, which of course made me think about everything anyway. About looking at the numbers and deciding I'd rather see some of it doing good now than have all of it sit quietly until a probate court said otherwise. "This isn't a judgment on your life or choices," I wrote. "Use it however makes sense for you, tuck it away, invest it, fix the roof. No expectations, no strings. Just know that I love you and I'm proud of the man you've become." I signed it, folded the check inside, and set it aside. Lisa S. came next. "Dear Lisa," I wrote. Her cursive looks like mine, which amused me even as my hand shook a little. I told her the same story in different words. I mentioned Ethan and Josh by name. I told her I hoped this might lift one weight from her shoulders, even if just for a season. "You have carried so much for so long," I wrote. "You make it look easy, but I know it is. Maybe this can buy you a little breathing room. My gift comes with no conditions, except that you promise me you won't feel guilty if you use a tiny bit for something that makes you happy." I signed my name, tucked in the check, and pressed the card closed. Mark's took the longest. "Dear Mark," I wrote, and then sat there staring at his name. How do you write to the child who has borrowed and promised, called at midnight in tears, vanished for months, then reappeared with a new job, a new roommate, a new crisis? The child about whom your mind quietly runs through words you don't say out loud: booze, pills, debts, bad choices, while your heart keeps repeating one: please. I know some of the outline of his life these last years. The eviction, the job that didn't last, the friends who turned out to be something else. I know enough to suspect there were nights he slept on a mattress on a floor if he was lucky enough to have the mattress. I know there were mornings he called saying he'd change, that he was going to meetings and talking to someone, and other stretches where the silence between us felt like its own kind of answer. I didn't want this money to be another fix, it loan he could feel ashamed of not repaying. I didn't want to pretend 10,000 could mend years of potholes. In the end, I wrote what I could live with. "I know life hasn't been simple for you," I wrote. "This isn't meant to fix everything. I know it can't. It's a way of saying I haven't forgotten you, that I still believe you can build something solid, and that I want you to have a little bit of room to breathe. What you do with it is yours to decide. My love for you is not measured in dollars or in promises kept or broken." I signed my name. My hand shook more that time. The next morning, a pale March sun trying to convince the world spring was coming. I walked to the post office and dropped all 3 envelopes into the blue box, one after another. There was something almost ceremonial about it, like launching 3 small boats onto a river. Each would find its own current. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Here is something no one tells you about giving money away. The giving itself is quick. The waiting afterward stretches. I told myself I had no expectations. I told myself that to give freely meant not keeping any kind of silent score. But telling yourself something and feeling it are 2 different talents, and I've always been better at the first. Lisa's response came 3 days later. I was rinsing a mug when the phone rang, the landline, the one only a handful of people still use. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up. "Hi, Moms." Lisa's voice, already thickening the way it does when she's holding something back. "Got your card," she said. You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. "That's why I did." She let out a little laugh that tripped into a sniffle. $10,000, she said softly, almost like she was afraid to say it too loud. "Do you know what that means for us right now?" "I imagined," I said, "but I'd rather hear it from you." It all spilled out then. The credit cards creeping up since the transmission went out on the car last fall. The orthodontist for Ethan. How they'd been telling the boys maybe next year when the topic of summer camp came up, stretching paychecks like elastic over too many hooks. "It's like you reached across town and lifted a corner of this weight off my chest," she said. "Just enough that I can breathe again." We talked for over an hour. About the money, yes, but also about her job at the library, the new neighbors, a recipe she'd tried. She asked about my blood pressure in detail. I downplayed it, not wanting to worry her, but admitted the spell had scared me. "Do you need anything done around the house?" she asked. "We can come by this weekend. Mark can help with the gutters and the boys can. I cut in, I'm all right for now, but I'll let you know if that changes. Mom, she said quietly before we hung up, thank you, not just for the money, for thinking of us like that. I'd love you the same if you left me nothing, you know that, right? I do, I said, but it does my heart good to hear you say it. The next day, an envelope arrived with my own name on it, in her familiar handwriting. Inside was a simple card filled with sentences that looped and crossed themselves, as if she couldn't get them down fast enough. She wrote about reading my words twice before seeing the check, about crying at her kitchen table, about how she'd show the boys, and talk to them about gratitude. I hope you know, she wrote, that no number would change how much I love you, or how much you've already given me. I sat with that card in my lap a long time. Daniel's response came 2 days after Lisa's by email. Subject line, thanks. Mom, it began. Got your card and the check. That was very generous. You didn't have to do that. I could hear him in the brisk sentences. I've already deposited it, he wrote. I'll probably put most toward our emergency fund and some into the brokerage account. It'll help shore things up and give us more flexibility. Maybe push Connor's college fund a little further ahead. You always taught us to think long-term, so this fits. There was a paragraph about tax implications and annual gift limits, which he knew I'd worry about. At the end he wrote, appreciate it. We'll put it to good use. There was one more line, almost as an afterthought. Lisa mentioned you had a spell at the store. Hope you're feeling better now. It wasn't unkind, but compared to Lisa's ink-smeared paragraphs, it felt tidy. Contained, like mother gives son $10,000 was an item to be logged and filed. I printed the email anyway, because I like the feel of paper more than screens. Mark took longer. 3 days, 5, a week. By the 8th day, I'd convinced myself the envelope had been lost, that some faceless machine or curious clerk had intercepted his check. I pictured a hypothetical future argument where he said, "You never think of me," and I finally said, "Well, actually." And then both of us discovering the universe had swallowed $10,000 whole. On the 9th day, my cell phone buzzed on the counter with a text. Hey, got the check. 4 words, no punctuation. No love, no thanks. I stared at the screen, waiting for more. Nothing came. I'm glad it arrived safely, I tapped back. The little dots appeared, blinked, disappeared. A minute later, the phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, and my heart did the same uncomfortable jump it has done with Mark for years. Hope tangled with dread. Hey, Mom, he said. TV noise murmured behind him. So, $10,000. Yes, I said, that was the amount. He let out a quick, humorless laugh. Yeah, I can read. I bit back a sigh. Thank you, he said, the words pushed out fast. I mean it, it'll help. I'm glad, I said. How are you doing? He was quiet a beat too long. You know, same, work's a mess. The guy I'm staying with is talking about moving out, so I might have to find another place. Car S making a noise again. I'm sorry, I said, that's a lot. You know, he went on, his tone shifting. 10,000 sounds like a lot, but when you think about rent and gas and all that, it's really not that much. Just kind of disappears. I closed my eyes for a second. I understand things are expensive, I said. I don't expect it to fix everything. Yeah, he sighed. I guess I was surprised. I always figured you'd leave us something when you know later. If you had that much to give now, I thought maybe it'd be, I don't know, more. The word hung there. I'm not dead yet, Mark, I said softly. I didn't mean it like that, he said quickly. I'm just stressed, okay? Sorry. I know you are, I said, and I'm not taking anything back. It's yours, free and clear. He exhaled loudly. Yeah, okay, well, thanks, for real, I guess. We circled familiar topics for a while: bad bosses, overdue bills, maybe this time plans. When we hung up, he still hadn't asked how I was feeling. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, with 3 different kinds of gratitude in front of me. Lisa's handwritten card, its edges soft under my thumb. Daniel's printed email, 2 neat paragraphs and 1 brief question about my health. Mark's text, glowing on my phone, got the check. If you'd laid them out without names and asked me to match child to thank you, I would have done it in a heartbeat. The money hadn't changed who they were. It had amplified it. And the unsettling part wasn't what I saw in them. It was what it forced me to confront in myself. Because for all my insistence that this wasn't a test, I realized, sitting there with paper and glass and plastic in front of me, that some part of me was grading. Not their love, that's too big and tangled for any one gesture to measure, but their attention, their ability to see beyond the numbers to the hand that had written them. I slept poorly. Not the usual old woman insomnia, chasing aches and to-do lists around the bed, but a restless review of words. How thank you could feel like a hug from one child, a receipt from another, and a reluctant obligation from the third. If I'd known exactly how each would respond, would I still have done it? Lying there in the dark, I realized the answer was yes. Because the money had done what I wanted it to do. It had given Lisa breathing room. It had underlined Daniel's already solid plans. It had, at the bare minimum, pushed the wolves a step or 2 back from Mark's thin door. But their responses had done something I hadn't intended. They had turned a question I'd been avoiding for years into one I couldn't ignore. What does fair really mean at this stage of my life? For decades, I told myself that fairness meant equal numbers. 3 children, 3 equal shares, as if dividing a pie exactly could somehow compensate for all the unevenness baked into real lives. But I know better. I spent nearly 4 decades in classrooms, watching what happens when you hand every child the same thing and call it fair. Some need extra help, some need a different kind of challenge, some just need you to look them in the eye more often. Still, this felt different. This was everything I had. I thought about calling someone, my lawyer, the pastor, one of the ladies from church. But how do you admit, without sounding small, I gave my kids money and now I'm troubled by the way they said thanks? So instead, 2 mornings later, when the dreary March sky had brightened a little, I called Evelyn. We met at the little diner we've been going to since they still let you smoke in the back booths. We've known each other more than 50 years. We started teaching the same fall and clung to each other like life rafts in that first sea of sticky fingers and report cards. If there's anyone entitled to my tangled thoughts, it's her. We took our usual table by the window. She poured cream into her coffee, watching me over the rim with that narrow-eyed look she gets when she smells a story. "What's all that weather in your forehead?" she asked, tapping 2 fingers between her own brows. "Just getting old," I said lightly. "Don't waste that line on me," she said. "You've got your pretend everything's fine voice on. Out with it." So I told her, not all at once, in pieces, the dizzy spell, the papers at my table, the 3 checks, the 3 responses. She didn't interrupt much. Just the occasional raised eyebrow, a soft a little snort when I quoted some of Mark's less gracious comments. When I finished, she stirred her coffee slowly. "So," she said, "how are you feeling about all that really?" "I don't know," I said, which wasn't entirely true. She just waited. "I'm not surprised by them," I said at last. "Lisa's always worn her heart on her sleeve. Daniel's always turned everything into a plan. And Mark," I trailed off. "And Mark is still Mark," she supplied gently. "Still Mark," I agreed. "Put a crisis and a joke in a blender, and there he is." She smiled a little. "So if you're not surprised by them, what surprised you?" I looked out the window at the muddy parking lot. "How I felt," I said, "seeing it all lined up." She nodded slowly. "What did you think would happen when you sent those checks?" I hesitated. I told myself I was just helping, that I wanted to see the money do some good while I was here to enjoy it. I wanted Lisa to sleep a little easier. I wanted Daniel to have one less thing to worry about. I wanted, God help me, I wanted Mark to have a chance to catch his breath. "And," she asked, "and somewhere in there, I think I also wanted," I struggled for the right words. "I wanted to see how they'd hold it, how they'd hold me, I guess." She tilted her head. "So you wanted information." "You make it sound clinical," I said. She chuckled. "Since when are you afraid of information? You used to hand out pop quizzes for fun." "That was different," I said. "Those kids hadn't been living in my heart for 50 years. She took a sip of coffee. "Did you mean it when you say you didn't plan it as a test?" "I did," I said quickly. Then slower. "At least, at first I did. Sitting at the table with the bills and the numbers, I truly was thinking about usefulness, about wanting to help now. But once the cards went in the mail, I can't pretend there wasn't a little voice inside waiting to see who called, who wrote, who typed." We were both quiet for a moment. "I feel guilty," I admitted, "for judging their reactions, for sitting there with Lisa's letter and Daniel's email and that stupid text from Mark and comparing, like some kind of emotional accountant." "Maybe don't call it judgment," Evelyn said. "Call it noticing." "Is there a difference?" I asked. "Noticing is what you've always done," she said. "In the classroom, at home, you see patterns, you adjust. Judging is deciding someone's worth because of what you notice." I thought about that. "What are you adjusting toward?" she asked after a moment. "That's the part I don't know yet," I said. She nodded, satisfied that I was at least asking the right question, and let the conversation drift to other things. Her grandson's science fair, a leak in her roof, the way our bodies seem to be held together more by prescription bottles than anything else now. But on the walk home, her question clung to me like the damp air. What was I going to adjust? A week later, the ground thawed enough that crocuses dared show themselves, and I went to see my lawyer. I'd been meaning to update my will since Robert died. 7 years is a long time to tell yourself you'll get to it soon. My old documents still had both our names at the top and reflected a life that no longer existed. The lawyer, a patient man with kind eyes and a desk cluttered in an organized way, flipped through the file he'd pulled. "Your previous instructions were straightforward," he said. "Equal division of assets among your 3 children. House to be sold unless one buys out the others. No special provisions." "I remember," I said. "What would you like to change?" he asked. The question I'd been circling all month landed squarely in front of me. "I still want them treated fairly," I said slowly. "But I've realized fair doesn't necessarily mean identical." He nodded, not looking surprised. "It often doesn't," he said. "Tell me what's on your mind." So I did. I told him about Lisa's steady strain, about how 10,000 had knocked back some of the immediate fires, but not the fundamental insecurity of stretching one library salary and one mechanic's paycheck over a mortgage and 2 growing boys. I told him about Daniel, solid as a fence post, with a good job and retirement accounts and spreadsheets tracking everything from their insurance premiums to what they'll likely spend when Maddie goes to college. I told him about Mark, about the evictions, the nights I suspect he slept on a floor, the way money slips through his fingers like water, and the times he'd mumbled about meetings, and trying again when I dared ask if he was getting help. I don't want to punish anybody, I said, and I don't want to buy love, but I also can't pretend they're in the same place. He tapped his pen on the pad. You mentioned one son has had addiction issues, he asked gently. Yes, I said. Saying it out loud made my throat tighten. We've never had a formal diagnosis, but there were bottles, pills, disappearing money. He says he's going to meetings now and then. I want to believe him. He nodded. In situations like that, sometimes a trust structure can be helpful. It's possible to arrange things so he has support over time, rather than one lump sum that could do more harm than good. We talked through options. A small trust for Mark, dispersing a modest amount monthly, and allowing for extra payments for specific things, treatment, housing, education, if needed. A share for Daniel, enough to be meaningful but not transformative to a man who already had safety nets of his own. A slightly larger, more flexible share for Lisa, whose margin for error in life has always been thin. We added separate, modest funds for the grandchildren, education accounts with their names spelled out, Madeline and Connor, Ethan and Joshua. Enough that one day, when books and tuition feel heavy, there will be a line in a financial aid office somewhere that says, Grandma. When we were done, the numbers weren't shockingly different from equal thirds. I couldn't make myself swing a heavy pendulum in any direction. But they were honest. They acknowledged reality instead of the fantasy of 3 identical situations. As he slid the draft across for me to read, the lawyer said, Your estate isn't a report card, Mrs. Avery. It's a tool. You're allowed to use it in a way that fits who your family really is. I walked home in the pale April sun feeling lighter and a little sad. Lighter because I'd finally stopped clinging to neatness for its own sake. Sad because seeing your children clearly, as the complicated adults they are, always involves letting go of something. Spring, as the weatherman insisted on calling this chilly season, slowly turned into something that actually felt like it by the time lilacs bloomed along the fence. Life settled into its ordinary grooves. Lisa called more often, sometimes with one of the boys chattering in the background about soccer or science projects, sometimes alone just because she was driving from the grocery store and missing me. One afternoon in May, she came by with a grocery bag, and that familiar "I bought too many" lie on her lips. As we put things away, she said almost shyly, We used a little bit of the money for something, not strictly sensible. Oh, I said, did you finally buy yourself a silly pair of shoes? She laughed. Not exactly. We booked a long weekend at the shore. A cheap motel, nothing fancy. But the boys have only seen the ocean once, and they still talk about it. I thought, maybe it's worth a little less debt paid this month to give them that before they're teenagers who roll their eyes at everything. I looked at her. At the tiredness around her eyes, the way she waited for my verdict as if she were 12 again. I'm glad, I said. I didn't send that check so you could be miserable more efficiently. She barked out a surprised laugh. You sound like Dad, she said. A couple weeks later, she brought me a framed photo from that trip. Her and her husband and the boys on a windy gray beach, hair flying in all directions, no one perfectly posed. They all looked a little rumpled and absolutely alive. I put it on the shelf next to her wedding picture. That felt right. Daniel remained reliable as tides. His Sunday evening calls came as scheduled. If something at work delayed him, he'd text first. Running 15 minutes behind, call you then. As if I had a busy social calendar that required notice. The first Sunday after the checks, he didn't mention the money at all until the end of the conversation, when people usually say, "Good night." "Oh, and Mom," he said, "thanks again. I know I was a little businesslike in that email. It's how my brain works. But it's a lot. We really do appreciate it." "I know you do," I said, "and your email sounded exactly like you." He chuckled. "Yeah, well, Maddie says my love language is spreadsheets." "She's not entirely wrong," I said. The next week, he called on time again. "How are you really feeling?" he asked, somewhere between an update on Connor's baseball team and a rant about software glitches. "Lisa told me more about what happened at the store. You scared me." I blinked at the phone. "I scared you." "You're not 25, he said. "Dizzy spells they're not nothing anymore." "I'm fine," I said. "They gave me a pill the size of a crumb and instructions to sit down faster. I can manage that." He was silent a moment, then said, a little gruffly, "Just don't scare us like that again, okay?" "What, get older?" I asked wryly. "You know what I mean," he said. A few days later, he sent another email, this one with an attachment titled Plan Update, XLSX. "Figured you might like to see where your gift went," he wrote. "And no, you're not a line item, we'd be okay without it. But it helps, and it kicked us into finally doing our own wills and life insurance properly. Apparently we're grown-ups now." I opened the spreadsheet and stared at the sea of boxes and percentages until my eyes crossed. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood enough to see that my 10,000 had become part of a net, not a rope. He'd added a little note at the bottom in plain words. "You and Dad didn't have parents who could help like this. You still made something solid. That keeps me honest about what I'm doing for my kids. Thank you for that, too." I printed that page and slid it into the same drawer where I kept Lisa's card. And then there was Mark. If my connection with my oldest and my middle could be graphed in neat lines, my relationship with my youngest has always looked more like one of those weather maps. Fronts colliding, sudden storms, brief clearings. He didn't vanish this time, not completely. But he didn't transform into a different man overnight either. This isn't that kind of story. The first few weeks after the check, I heard from him in small bursts. A photo of a takeout meal with the caption, "First decent dinner I've had in a while." A text complaining about his boss. A call where he was half watching a game and half talking to me. Then, one afternoon in late April, as I was wiping down the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed with another photo. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. A small couch in a cramped room. The cushions didn't match, and the coffee table in front of it was scarred. But the couch itself looked sturdy. Clean. Underneath, he'd written, "Got rid of the old mattress on the floor. Figured I should have a place to sit and sleep." I hadn't known for sure he'd been sleeping on a mattress on the floor, but I'd suspected. You learn, as a mother of a certain kind of son, that there are details you don't ask about unless you're ready to hear the answer. "That looks comfortable," I wrote back. "Better than sitting on crates," he replied. Something in my chest tightened, then eased. "I'm glad you have somewhere decent to rest," I typed. The dots disappeared. Finally he wrote, "Thanks, Mom, for real." It was those last 2 words that got me. Later that week, Another text came at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, not his usual call time. "Went to a meeting tonight," it said. My heart stuttered. We danced around this topic for years, talking about getting help and trying to cut back, never quite letting certain words land. "How did it go?" I wrote, after deleting "I'm proud of you" twice. "Weird," he responded, "but good. I didn't bolt, that's something." "That is something," I wrote back. "I'm glad you stayed." We didn't mention the money in that conversation. But I couldn't help thinking that a real couch, a lock on a door that was his, and a month or two of breathing room might have made it just barely possible for him to sit in that folding chair under fluorescent lights and listen. Sometimes the grace money gives isn't dramatic. It's just enough stability to let you choose a different discomfort. As spring surrendered to early summer, and the air grew thick with cut grass and neighbors' barbecue smoke, my life looked, from the outside, much the same as it had before the dizzy spell. I tended to my little yard. I went to appointments. I saw Evelyn for coffee. I watched game shows with the volume a little too loud. But inside, something in me had shifted. Not just about the money, but about how I saw the people attached to it. One humid afternoon in June, I was rummaging in the kitchen drawer for tape and came across the original bank receipts from that day in March. 3 withdrawals, 3 checks, 3 amounts that had once seemed terrifying, then liberating, then complicated. I sat down at the table, the same spot I'd used for lesson plans and lunchboxes and late-night grading, and spread out my little paper archive. Lisa's card, Daniel's printed emails, a screenshot I'd asked Ethan to make for me of Mark's couch photo, and for real text so I could have it on paper too. For years I'd spoken of the kids as if they were a single unit. The boys, the 3 of you. Looking at these, I saw 3 separate adults more clearly than I had in a long time. A woman who says thank you with ink and visits, and a framed beach photo. A man who says thank you with spreadsheets and Sunday calls, and a gruff, "Don't scare us like that." A man who says thank you with a picture of a second-hand couch, a hesitant for real, and a text about a meeting he didn't bolt from. I thought back to the beginning, to my insistence. I didn't plan it as a test. It still wasn't, not in the way people like to tell stories about greedy children revealing their true colors. I hadn't baited a trap. I hadn't chosen the amount or the timing as some elaborate experiment. But somewhere between licking envelopes and holding their responses, it had become something close to a test for me. A test of my willingness to see them as they are, not as I wished them to be. Evelyn had been right. I wasn't judging their worth. I was updating my information. And with that information, I made choices. At the lawyer's office, in conversations, in small, private shifts of expectation. Toward the end of June, all 4 grandchildren ended up in my living room at once, which doesn't happen as often as you might think. Lisa's boys sprawled on the rug with building blocks, arguing about the best way to construct a bridge. Daniel's 2 hunched over the coffee table, thumbs flying on their phones, occasionally looking up to roll their eyes at the younger cousins. "Put those things down for 5 minutes," Daniel said, half amused. "Say hi to Grandma like you mean it." Maddie came over and sat on the arm of my chair. "Dad says you gave him money," she said frankly. "Teenagers have a talent for stepping right on the delicate parts." "Yes," I said, "I did." "That was cool of you," she said. "He showed me his spreadsheet. He was very excited." I laughed. I'm glad my gift brought him such joy. Connor chimed in from the table without looking up. "He also made us talk about budgeting," he said. "So thanks for that, too." "You're welcome," I said dryly. Later, when the house was quiet again and the last of the crumbs swept up, I sat back down at the table. People like to say money changes everything. I don't think that's quite right. I think money amplifies what's already there. Fear, gratitude, entitlement, humility, hope. $10,000 each hadn't turned my children into angels or villains. It hadn't made Mark miraculously sober, or Daniel suddenly poetic, or Lisa any less prone to worry. What it had done, what I hadn't expected, is force me to stop hiding behind the idea that loving your children means treating them all the same, no matter what. The legal papers in my lawyer's office now reflect that in quiet ways. A slightly larger cushion for the child with the thinnest margin. A trust that will hand the most volatile one his inheritance in teaspoons instead of a bucket. A share for the most secure one that acknowledges both his stability and the symbolism of not leaving anyone out. But those papers are only one kind of inheritance. The other kind is here. In this story, I'm speaking into a little plastic recorder at my kitchen table. The story of a March dizzy spell, 3 checks, 3 thanks, and a mother finally giving herself permission to see clearly. Someday, 5 years from now, 10 or tomorrow, if that's how the wind blows, they'll divide what's left. They may argue, or they may surprise me and cooperate. They may remember that spring when unexpected money arrived, or it may blur into the general fog of things Mom did. I have no control over that. What I do have, here and now, is the knowledge that I did more than hoard or hand out. I paid attention. I adjusted. I tried in my imperfect way to match what I had to who they are. If no one ever listens to this tape but me, that will be enough. Because in the quiet of this kitchen, with the afternoon light softening the worn edges of everything, I finally understand. The most valuable thing I had to give was never the money. It was the act of looking at my children as they truly are and loving them there,